So good afternoon friends. Today we'll continue with our lecture of 45 days psychology, complete preparation of psychology in 45 days, and we'll continue with our chapter of research methods. Research methods. Earlier we have done methods of psychology or methods in psychology, and we had done quite a significant portion of research methods as well. Today we'll see other chapters. Like what we had seen earlier was your fundamental research versus applied research. We had seen several steps in psychological research like problem statement, hypothesis formulation, research design, which is very important, and the significance of research design was also evaluated, analyzed, and as we have seen, many of the questions appeared from significance of research design (RD), which you must know in detail. And the points, as I told you, points mentioned in the answer need not be many. You have to elaborate upon fewer points which you are going to put in. The fewer points may be 4, 5, likewise. Okay, so what we'll do today are these topics. The topic number 1 is your two types mainly research design. One is your experimental and another one is your ex post facto. Now you see, if you look at the question paper, previous year question paper, as I keep on telling you, previous year question papers are very important. You will realize that the examiner is trying to understand your conceptual grip over this comparison, experimental versus ex post facto, understanding of what is experimental design, what is ex post facto design. What is experimental design? Experimental design is a research design, a blueprint, a backbone of research where you have the liberty to manipulate IV. What is IV? Independent variable. Independent variable, one thing. Independent variable is a variable which is largely independent of other variables whose manipulation brings changes in dependent variable. Our endeavor in experimental design is to ensure effective manipulation of independent variable, which is also called treatment. What is treatment? Treatment is nothing but manipulation of IV. That is treatment. Once we have manipulated IV effectively, it results in the objective measurement of DV. Also, effective control of EV, external variable, which needs to be controlled so that we can reach upon a objective and clear IVDV cause and effect relationship. And you must understand, if you have to realize the significance of IVDV cause and effect relationship, you must know that most of the psychological research are unable to provide this IVDV cause and effect relationship. You know what is the reason? Because most of the research design in psychology or any of the social sciences are of ex post facto nature. We'll see what is ex post facto in a few minutes. First of all, let's see what are the characteristics of experimental design. You have understood experimental design. Our endeavor is to conduct an experimental design, but experimental design may or may not be possible many a times because of the reasons which are ethical in nature. Ethical limitations, time which is required to conduct this are very high, energy required and money involvement. You must know that whatever you are doing on this earth, time, energy, money must be saved. If you are saving time, energy and money, then it's always going to be effective. So EQ, as we always say, EQ, efficient, effective, ethical. The research must be efficient, effective, ethical. And to ensure that research is efficient, effective, ethical, you must ensure that time involvement is less, effective, outcome based. It should solve some problem. If you are doing a research, there may be pure research. For that, experimental design is suitable, which gives you quantity and it helps in the pure or basic research. But when it comes to applied research, it must be result oriented. It must solve some problem, some social problem. Generally speaking, these social problems are narrow in nature, unique in nature. And we have seen the qualitative research where your attitude, opinion, belief is reflected, that is of more important. Okay, more important is your qualitative research as compared to quantitative research. The ethical angle, of course, you cannot do any research which is unethical. Ethical supremacy is the hallmark of any research in social sciences, especially. Natural sciences generally are based on lab based experiment, controlled experiment. So, the angle of ethics is very less involved in natural sciences. But still, if you look at the medical sciences research, there may be certain cases where the subject matter of the study, like it was done in the case of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, HPV, human papilloma virus. They had conducted a test. Path Foundation, they had conducted a test upon young adolescents, women. So many of them died. A few of them suffered from chronic disease after the HPV vaccine trial was used upon them. So these ethical angles must be in your mind, especially when you are talking about the psychological researchers. Okay, let's see. Uh, Research design of experimental nature. Characteristic number one, IV manipulation, effective IV manipulation, DV objective measurement, EV control. This is manipulated IV, measured objectively, EV is controlled. This is first characteristic. What about the main principle, the other characteristic? As I've told you, if we conduct any of the researches, it is important that these principles, the principles of randomization, replication, and local control. What is randomization? Whenever we have these experimental group upon which the treatment will be introduced, that is the manipulation of IV will be done on experimental group, not control group. Control group, these are the two groups. The subject matter, that is a number of subjects. Suppose 100 students are there. They will be divided into two groups, but that division will be random. We don't know who is going into control group and who is going into experimental group. And when we hide this information, there may be single blind or double blind. Single blind means the subjects don't know. Double blind means neither the subjects nor the experimenter knows. That's called double blind. Why do we do so? To ensure that there are no biases and errors on the part of the subjects as well as the researcher. This is the question which was asked in UPSC prelims 2023, UPSC mains. In fact, optionals are not asked in prelims. So, mains psychology paper. This was a question of your 10-15 marker. 10 or 15 marks. Now, the thing is, see, this question is very simple. You must remember the basic principles behind it and how do you write it, whether you have been able to express your conceptual clarity or not. First thing. Secondly, have you been able to give some example? Then, if possible, if required, wherever, have you been able to give some diagram flowchart? Not chipping in diagram flowchart everywhere. Wherever required, there only. And whether your answer speaks clarity or not. Have you understood? That's the biggest problem which I saw in many of the papers, where the students have written anything and everything, whatever they know about the particular topic. But if you ask them, if you just look at the sentences, you'll realize the clarity is missing. One, secondly, they have just dropped the points, they have not explained it. That's the biggest catch. Remember, this exam is easy only and only if you have the clarity. If you run after the content, as many people do, and keep on mugging up the content without realizing that just putting up the content will not fetch you marks. It is important for you to give 3-4 points but explain them well. It is important for you to understand the concepts. It is important for you that when you sit in the examination, when you see the questions, you repeat the questions again and again until and unless you understand the sense of it and write it very precisely. Give an example wherever required. Give a flowchart or diagram. If the diagram or flowchart is very complex, then leave it. Simplify it. Then you fetch marks. This is how you keep yourself separate from others, from the bunch of people who are actually driven towards content only. That is the differentiator. And if you see, there are certain things which I have already talked about the prelims preparation. A generic video also I will give you on my YouTube channel. It will be available, where you'll be able to see there is a generic principles of success. There are certain things if you follow, you'll be succeeding in all walks of life, and that is quite scientific. Rather than just being motivated, you must plan as well. The limbic system in your mind is going to help you just to get the kick, but that kick will not sustain the successful endeavor. To ensure that there is success, you must get the kick, that is the motivation, which must be sustainable. Secondly, if you have to keep yourself stress free and perform well, you must remember that there is a planning. You have planned everything beforehand. Likewise, for the answer writing as well, you have prepared the fodder of the material, fodder of the question paper, fodder for the answers which are going to be asked in the papers like UPSC, because most of the questions are repeated, the themes are repeated, the concepts are repeated. You must remember the main concepts and present it there. You will get very good marks. But unfortunately, that's the problem with most of the aspirants. So, the characteristics which we have understood, then if we are using this research design with experimental design, what are the merits? First and foremost, you must remember, whenever we have a setup like experimental group, control group, and treatment, manipulation of the IV so that we can measure DV objectively, then the one thing which is going to be there is internal validity is going to be very high. What is the meaning of internal validity? The experimental setup is a closed system. It's a closed system. Here comes the IV manipulation as an input. Then there is DV, dependent variable, which is measured objectively. Right? So to ensure that we have high internal validity, what we must control? EV. IVDV, objective cause and effect relationship, is established. Remember this sentence, you can straight away write it. EV control is established. So given this setup, whenever this setup is there, the result, the outcome of this research can be replicated. This is called internal validity. Validity of the setup, orthodox setup. What is the orthodox setup? What has come to your mind? Orthodox setup. Orthodox setup, any of the classroom. This is the classroom. It's a teacher. Teacher will come, deliver the lecture. Nobody will ask any questions. Most of people will not ask any questions. Then the teacher, after delivering the lecture, will go out. The traditional setup of UPSC coaching as well. But if you look at the way it should be, the teacher should be interactive, should be asking you questions, you should be asking the questions back. Which one of them is having high internal validity? The first setup, because that is a very strict controlled environment. But if you look at the real world scenario, what is going to benefit is this interactive approach. When even if the teacher has committed a mistake or some problem is there, the teacher will correct it next lecture, in the next lecture, and the teacher may repeat certain lectures so that the students will understand with clarity. That is the biggest issue which we encounter. I am just giving you an example so that you can understand. That's the biggest issue. The problem with the students' mindset is that they are coming from a college. What is happening in college? The teacher will come, they will deliver the lecture. You have to mug up everything, and in the examination you have to write it. No critical examination, no analysis, no discussion, nothing is done. Right? Everything is defined, straight jacketed. The same approach the teachers, students are looking at here. But UPSC requires you to discuss things. UPSC requires you to prepare things in advance. UPSC also requires you to have conceptual clarity, which is not done generally. So look at the second scenario where there is discussion, the open-minded approach of the teacher is there. It will have high ecological validity. What is the meaning of ecological validity? Ecological. What's the meaning of ecological validity? In the real world, this thing helps. The second type helps. Okay, so to ensure that there is high internal validity, effective control of EV, cause and effect relationship is established. The merits of experimental design. Internal validity is high. The second merit. Cause and effect relationship is established. EV control is effective. External variable control is effective, which is very important to ensure that the point number 2 happens. Cause and effect relationship is established objectively or as objectively as possible. Okay, EV control. EV control is effective. Right? What are the weaknesses? As we have already talked about, weaknesses, that is demerits. Ecological validity is low. Ecological validity, the validity in the real world, that is very low, as we understand that it's a straight-jacketed controlled environment in the lab which cannot be replicated, which cannot be compared to the real world scenario. Okay. Then the time involved is very high, cost involved is very high, time cost involvement is high, and apart from that, the ethical constraints, the ethics, the ethical constraints restrict the setup of a straight jacketed strict controlled environment of your lab. So these are the demerits due to which we generally conduct ex post facto research. Now we'll understand what is ex post facto research. Ex post facto research. What does the ex post facto mean? Ex post facto means that the manipulation of independent variable is not possible. Whatever manipulation, whatever changes were to be done in any variable, which cannot be called independent variable actually, has already been caused. We can just see the effect of it. IV was there, manipulation was there in research design, but here there is no IV. We can only see the effect of already manipulated or naturally occurring variable. For example, a state or a place which is on the border of two states, which is on the border of two enemy nations. There will always be blasts, there will always be war cry, there will always be noise. What is the effect of these issues, these certain variables, on the psychological health of residents in these areas? Can there be PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder? We can just see the effect of noise, the effect of stress. We cannot manipulate these things. Or suppose somebody asks you the effect of gender in success in civil services examination, that how gender neutral the civil services success is. Does the gender have any effect on civil services success? Now you see here, in ex post facto, you cannot change the gender of a person, or you cannot manipulate the gender. That is, somebody who is already a female or a male, you cannot change their gender to something opposite. Can we do? The answer is no. Because of these reasons, we have to just evaluate the effect of naturally occurring variables, naturally occurring events. Okay, but as these studies are done in real world setup, their ecological validity is really high. Of course, once the ecological validity is really high, the internal validity, what we look for in the validity of a controlled experiment is missing here. Ecological validity high, internal validity low. The effect of noise can be calculated, but can we manipulate the noise? The answer is no. So, the effect of those variables can also be evaluated whose manipulation is not possible. And as we have seen in experimental design, the problem is that the time, energy, money involvement is quite high. Whereas in the ex post facto, because we are just supposed to see the effect of something which has already occurred, largely it is an observant duty, observation based study. The time involvement, the money involvement, the energy involvement is very, very less. So, what happens in ex post facto is largely your descriptive type of research. We'll understand its merits and demerits, where it is applied. The application of ex post facto research is across the domains of many social sciences. That's the application. Social issues, the applied part. The applied part of psychology is addressed by these kind of researchers, ex post facto. And broad horizon, this is the application. What are the merits and demerits? The variables can be explained without even manipulating them. The IV manipulation is not possible, but they can be explained really well in the descriptive type of research. And as we have seen, time involvement and cost involvement both are less. Unlike the experimental design, where the time and cost involvement both are really high. Here the time and cost involvement is very, very less. Now there are certain weaknesses as well. As we have seen, the ecological validity being high, but internal validity is really less. And the biggest problem is that it cannot establish the causality, cause and effect. Causality can't be established. As we have seen, IVDV relationship cannot be established objectively as it is done in experimental design. And what's the reason? The biggest reason is that EV control is not at all possible. And because of that, once the EV control is not possible, IVDV objective cause and effect relationship is not possible, and there are certain other things like the confounding variables. Confounding variables, many of the variables which may affect the result, but we had no control over them. They are largely hidden. They may also affect the IVDV relationship, can also chip in, making our result very, very inaccurate. Okay, so we have covered this. Ex post facto versus experimental design covered. Now, the other things like t-test, ANOVA, correlation, what all remains here, because most of the questions we have seen is that the straightforward questions are there. T-test, two-way ANOVA, two-way, one-way, just a comparison is there. One question has been asked, regression, correlation, and IRT. That also will cover, but I'm just dividing the class into shorter gaps because of certain reasons. One is that organization is better, and when you are looking at it, you can efficiently go through it and make your notes because that division is there. So just taking a break, and but we'll return after 15 minutes. So on again the another link I'll send and cover all these things today itself. No need to go anywhere, just remain here only. We'll be back after 15 minutes. Thank you very much.